I appreciate you all spending your morning, late morning here, when you could be so many other places in this beautiful state of Colorado. So over the next 40 or so minutes, I'd love to give you some, hopefully some practical things to take and some inspiration. I don't have any fancy handout or presentation, but I would highly recommend that you listen today as a thief, that you stay on the lookout for something you can steal and take with you today. So if that means flipping over the back of Win-Ann's handout, which is a great handout, a lot of what I'll talk about has, I think, dovetails nicely. So hopefully having that as a front back, her notes on one side, mine on the other, so those can marinate together in a delicious way. You can take something out of the end of our session. So again, yeah, my outcome for you today is to really empower you and encourage you to take some risks and try something different, and give you permission to just go. And the other thing I would love for you to leave with is, again, some practical ideas and things you could try out and can't wait to kick about, as I say, and sort of have fun with. When Arthur asked for actually I think it was Luke asked for a title, this was my working title, which I'm sticking with: Breakfast with Haydn, Improvising to Generate Compositional Material. And I'll get into the connection with Haydn in a bit, but I've told you what I'm hoping you get out of this. I think what you need to have as I guess a prerequisite, or what you need to have to jump into and start this, besides a piano or a keyboard you can make some sound at, is a high tolerance for risk. Or put another way, your sense of adventure has to outstrip, just a little bit, your sense of sheer terror. Last night, as an improviser, I tried some things I hadn't before. Fell flat on my face in a spot, but I survived to tell the tale, and I'm here. And even though what we're going to talk about today is not directly correlated to performing improvisations, I think it's still of prime importance that that virtue of courage is something you bring to the table. And that's going to take you through this whole adventure. So again, you got to have a sense of adventure, a sense of being willing to take a chance, and look forward to what you're going to discover in this process, beyond those boundaries of what's safe and familiar or comfortable. So that's what your prerequisite is, what you got to bring. So we'll talk about some strategies for you to use in your private research, I would say, in your practice studio, in your teaching studio. Some things you can try out in the safety of privacy. But the paradox today is that I'm going to look for a couple people, some victims, I mean volunteers, who are willing to come up and try in a very public way. We're going to do a bit of a lecture demonstration to try in a very public way some of these ideas, and to be courageous enough, whether solo or duo with me, to model and experiment some things. So when I came across this quote about Haydn, who's an improviser, I just had to share it with you. This is a little excerpt of something Haydn's servant and copyist wrote. It's from, translated, it's from his daily plan of the late Herr von Haydn. So this was basically a snippet of his calendar, of his diary. So the typical schedule for Haydn in the mornings was at 6:30 a.m. He would wake, shave, and dress while teaching. Students, so you're glad your teachers don't dress while they're teaching. So after waking, shaving, and dressing while teaching, mental picture, right? Promptly at 8 a.m., breakfast had to be on the table. So Haydn's servant and copyist would bring him breakfast. And this is the most important or interesting thing to me, is actually right after breakfast. So maybe this talk should be titled Right After Breakfast with Haydn. Right after breakfast, Haydn sat down to the piano and improvised. And at the same time, he would sketch out a plan for his composition. So remember, that's right after breakfast. So if he ate at 8 a.m., say he took a leisurely half hour. Then the hours from after that until 11:30 daily were destined for that. So probably at least, I would say, 2 to 3 hours in the morning, he would just be messing around with the keyboard. At 11:30, he made or accepted calls, and of course, not telephone calls at that time, but just receiving people, so he could have some social time. Or he'd take a walk up to about 1:30. Then from 2 to 3, he'd have a dinner. And around 3 o'clock, I love this, he'd have some little domestic chore. Use your imagination. And then after that, he would take a sketch and work with it. And I have another quote actually from Haydn himself talking about his method of improvising and composing with his improv. But isn't that incredible that every morning he would devote that block of time to improvising and sketching out ideas for composition. So if you get nothing else out of my spiel today, devote, even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, just put it on your calendar and say, I'm going to just try this out for the next week. I'm going to improvise and make some reminders for myself and see if I can generate some compositional ideas. Haydn said, when he was talking about how he would sit down at the piano to improvise, and again, this is a translation, he said, I sat down at the piano and began to fantasize whether my spirit were sad or happy, serious or playful. Once I had captured or seized upon an idea, my whole effort was to strive with all my might to develop and sustain that idea according to the rules of art. I love that he says, I sat down and began to fantasize whether my spirit were sad or happy, serious or playful. So hopefully that gives you some inspiration and even permission to try what he would try every day. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask someone to come up. We'll have at least, hopefully, 3 or 4 people come up and try some games with me. So as Alfred was saying, sometimes a blank slate is terrifying and paralyzing. So in my private teaching, I've used this deck of cards. It's just index cards, 3 by 5, on a little ring, so they don't fall out of my pocket. And most of these I developed, but a good number of them my students would develop as well, and I would credit them for developing some of these games. And it's divided in 3 categories. We'll probably look at the first category, which I called power-ups. I would frame these games in terms of imagining we were maybe doing some type of video game. And each one of these cards has points. So for instance, this first, well, I'll do stair step. This was 2 points, but we live in an inflationary age, so let's say it's worth 20 points today. The stair step would be to play a 5-finger pattern like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you could repeat fingers 2, 3, and 4. So you could go like 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. So just these little 2-note patterns that would go up and down. Another one, I referenced it just a second ago. I called a 5 alive. This is worth 20 points. Use all 5 fingers in a stepwise move, starting on any white note, or as I would call them, some of my younger students, valleys, and the black notes are mountains. You could have some bonuses where you could stretch or you could spread out beyond those 5, like a 5-note pattern, like in a C position. So there are tons of these little power-ups, as I call them. Really simple moves. I would use them more for almost micro etudes to get students to practice different choreographic building blocks without realizing they were practicing. I just frame it in terms of a game. But they're also going to be helpful for us today to generate some ideas. I would also have these other group of blue cards called battles, where I would, have both hands do something together. One I would call shadow. Play a 5-note pattern in both hands together. Try to move the same direction using different fingers. So trying to work on parallel motion, really, is what that was about. But these were some 2-handed exercises I would give my students. And there's some really complex ones here, or just fun ones. Like I like this one, which is worth 110 points. It's called Blindfold, and this is a quest, so it's worth way more. You would start at the lowest bass note, and with your eyes closed, play every black note of the keyboard. And if you made it to the top, you got all your points. So today, I would love my first, as I said, victim, who would be courageous enough to come and try out one of these really simple power-ups. Is that a hand back there? Yeah, come on up. Remind me your name again?
Gary.
Gary? Great.
It's Gary.
Gary, sorry. Gary, thank you. Great. And just remember that today, you're going to be here. Remember that today everyone's listening with love. They're admiring your courage. And they're not listening as critics, but they're listening with enthusiasm. So we're just going to try some stuff, some games together. We're not performing. We're just playing. You get to choose a power-up. So I'm not going to let you see which one it is. So which one of these yellow cards? Just stick your finger in one. Which one? Which one? This one? Double skip. Wow, this is where it's 20 points, okay? So here's the rules of the game. Starting with either your thumb or your pinky, try to skip notes. All right, so like a 1-3 or a 5-3, right? So starting again with either the same finger or another one, skip to a new note. So you could either go like this, right, and move around, or you could just try different fingers, always skipping, right?
Oh.
Try it. Try it for 20 seconds. Ready, go. Beautiful. Yeah. So you just opened up a whole world of possibilities for you. So the next step is to figure out how to sort of continue and develop that I would call sort of like the seed or the germ of your composition to come. So there's something like, and then you did, you went down here a little bit. I'm paraphrasing, right? Right? And you remember where you added that you changed one note? You went to, yeah, you went minor there. That was cool. So imagine you did that whole pattern and you get to change it. So I'm going to give you a menu, okay? All right, you ever been to a restaurant and they say, what would you like?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You got a menu of options. These are some ways to transform your idea. So you remember your general idea, that sort of that 15-second thing? Try again. It can be different, but try it. That's plenty. Beautiful. You've got a world of possibilities in there, okay? So which one of these, there's an appetizer or entrees. Would you like to work on displacing it, expanding it, piling on it, or do you want to look at the wild cards? You choose one of them.
What is a wild?
Ooh, I'm glad you asked. It's a special menu. You can choose any of these. So I've got a whole list. This is basically an outline of different things like playing high and low, or long versus short, using sound and silence. Which one of these looks interesting, even if you don't know what the word is? Just pick one and we'll play with it for a few minutes here. You can just point at it. Or pick the button.
Timber.
Great. So we'll work on timbre, so bright versus dark. This one's probably the most interesting one to try to use. I would say, just to get started, why don't you work actually with some pedal? So keeping it, we're going to translate that to sort of dry versus wet. Okay? So try playing your idea again, and just experiment with making part of it wet and part of it dry. So do you want, tell me about the dry versus wet. Which would you like to hear more of or less of? More or less pedal? I'm going to push you to try go a little further.
Less pedal?
Less pedal, okay.
But Only by a smidge.
Just a smidgen, a skosh. Great. A splash. A schlutz, as my in-laws would say. So why don't you do that again and use less pedal, but when you use pedal, really commit to it, okay? So really use a lot of it. So not wall to wall, but pick your spots and really use a lot of it when you use it.